DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, one philosophy, one book, one show, this daily masterclass. Yes, this comes out every day. And it is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today, let's talk about self-accountability, specifically for the Black community. Black self-accountability is the topic of today's masterclass. Now, originally, when I first thought of this topic some time ago, and I sat on this one for a minute because I wanted to make sure I came from an angle that I came from the right angle on this one. I was going to talk about if money would solve systemic racism, because there have been many stories of companies saying, all right, we're going to give this amount of money to help underprivileged communities, and then you have companies giving grants, and Canada, even the Prime Minister of Canada said he was like a $200 million program to support Black businesses in Canada. And even Michael Jordan himself said he's going to give $100 million. I think it was $100 million, like $10 million every year for 10 years to dedicate to Black businesses and communities and et cetera, et cetera. And when I really thought about it, and this really started, a lot of it started about a year ago in the summer of 2020. So many companies pledging how much money they were going to give to Black people, Black businesses, Black scholarships, et cetera, et cetera. I said, damn, if we add all this money up, I mean, that's all the reparations that people need. People still talk about reparations. Black people didn't get reparations. Listen, if all this money actually is given to the Black community in these ways that people are saying, then we actually got a surplus when it comes to these reparations. I don't know where exactly this money goes or how that stuff works when all these numbers get thrown around, but that was originally what I was going to talk about. And since so many donations are going out, again, to support Black businesses, Target said they are doing, and many other companies said they're doing a 15% pledge. And that was designed to give an, quote, equitable, close quote, share of shelf space and investment to Black-owned businesses. So they want to make sure at least 15% of the shelf space in their stores are dedicated to Black-owned businesses, along with support and training for doing this, I suppose. Now, all of these things are supposedly happening. All these things that are allegedly designed to make things more equal or equitable. And from what I understand, those are two different words. I don't even know which one is which, but equal, let's just say one of them meaning, let's just say two different definitions of things being equal. One definition is, okay, since Black people are, let's just say 15% of the population, it might be 12 or 13, let's just say 15% of the population. All right, so we got to make sure we give them 15% of the shelf space, or 15% of them need to get into colleges, 15% need to get this result and that result. Now, that's one way of looking at it. Then you got the anti-racist way of looking at it that I covered in the anti-racism series on that, the anti-racism book. And I covered that in the series of episodes 1788 through 1791. They were not talking about giving people 15% of the opportunity on the shelf at Target. They're saying at least 15% of the sales need to be to Black businesses. So not only do you have to be on the shelf, but people have to actually buy it. And if Target does not produce 15% sales to Black businesses, then that means that Target is in support or complicit in a racist policy, according to Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Again, it was in his book. I didn't make that up. You can read it yourself and go listen to episodes 1788 through 91. But either way, I am lampooning both of these because I don't think, actually, not even that I don't think, I know that neither of these is actually the solution or anything close to the solution for Black businesses. Even though, however, just to be clear, if Target and all these companies and Michael Jordan himself, who's Black, and whoever else, and the Prime Minister of Canada, I don't live in Canada, but if I did, listen, if you want to give me money because I'm Black and you think that's going to help balance things out, listen, I will gladly give you the address at which you can send the check, or I'll give you the account number. Now, I'll just give you the address. I don't even trust people with the account number. I'll give you the address. I'll take care of the check myself. I will gladly take the money. If the government decides, and there are a bunch of people who are still talking about this, that black people need to get reparations, and some of you are listening to this right now. If you believe black people deserve reparations because this group got reparations and this group is getting this and this group is getting that, and those things don't really add up, but I understand not everyone comprehends things on the same level, which is fine. If you want to go out and protest for reparations and you want to sign a petition and you want to go, put a hashtag on your bio or change the image on your social media profile that black people deserve reparations, listen, I ain't doing any of that shit. I'm telling you right now. But if you are successful at getting reparations for black people, listen, I want my piece. All right, I'm black, I want my money. But I'm not doing any work to go and create that because I think my time, effort, and energy is spent better doing other things. As we talked about in episode number 609, the 5 forms of investment. None of them is protesting. So again, I'm happy to have it. But what I'm going to address here today is what I touched on in a few episodes. First of all, this was episode 1634, where I gave you the specific plan that I have for Black America for election 2020. Now, we know the 2020 election was very contentious. That was between Joe Biden and President at the time, Donald Trump, now President Joe Biden, who won that election. And it's still contentious. There are still some people who want to contend what happened or what didn't happen in that election. Different conversation is not going to happen on this show, probably. And episode 1630, when I talked about how many white social justice warriors, and some people call these people liberals or leftists, extreme leftists, who are white people, they're actually sending black people backwards. I talked about that again. That was episode 1630 and episode 1634, and also in episode 1624. So this all happened in the span of 10 days. I told you the biggest challenges facing Black America. And I want to talk about the reasoning and the story behind the stuff that people are talking about. Well, this money needs to be given. This is the big thing now. It was, of course, about the cops for a while. People kind of got off the cops thing. Then it became critical race theory, and it's still critical race theory. But now the big thing is now, all right, just give us the money. All right, we need to give them, the black people, we need to give them the money. So I want to talk about some things that I think people have some wrong ideas about, and this is really about, as I say every time on this show, no matter what we're talking about, that we always got to bring it back to number one. So today, since we're talking about black people, what I'm really talking about here today is how do we bring it back to what black people need to do for themselves, not what someone else needs to do for you as a black person, or them if you're not a black person, even if you are, quote unquote, in support of black people. Point number one, the topic once again is black self-accountability. And let me say one more thing about this before I even get into my points. 2 more things, actually. First thing is that I have a text number I forgot to tell you about, where I want you to send me a text and tell me the best insight or the worst insight. Or if you have a question or challenge to anything that I say here today, send me a text. I will engage with you. My number is 305-384-6894. Again, 305-384-6894. And the second thing is this. If you are not a black American listening to this, if you are an African living in Africa, if you are a white person living in America, if you are a person who would be identified as white, even if you're not a white American, let's say you're from Europe, but you got fair skin. All right, for all those groups that I just mentioned, what I'm about to talk about here today is not a prescription for you, but I want you to listen to it because I want you to understand that what you may have been hearing about and from certain people in whoever, wherever, whatever you listen to, who knows, there's a lot of stuff out there that not all black people think the same way, and not all people are looking at these situations in the exact same way. And I mean, you all know my brand, you know my business, and you know how I come, how I'm delivering every single time, which is we always bring it back to the individual. It's never about pointing the fingers to the outside because we can't control what's happening on the outside. So we got to focus on what's happening on the inside. That's the way that I see it, and that's always going to be the main thing that we're going to look at no matter what is going on and who did it. So now let's get into our points. Number one, Booker T. Washington, who is a well-known name in the annals of black history. Booker T. Washington said, yes, racism does need to end. And Booker T. Washington's been dead for a long time. He did say that racism needs to end against black people, but at the same time, when that racism does end and black people do have full rights and opportunities to do what they want to do, black people also must be prepared for the opportunities that they claim they're being shut out from. Well, let's not even say claim. The opportunities that they are being shut out from, black people need to be prepared to take advantage of these opportunities. Okay, so Booker T. Washington was born in 1856 and he died in 1915, just to give you an idea of what time frame he was talking about. So he died 40 years before, was that 50 years actually, before civil rights were granted to black people. So he was talking about this way back. So racism needs to end, but black people also got to be prepared to take advantage of the freedoms and opportunities that will then be available to them because racism's over. When black people these days are out parading and protesting and claiming that systemic racism is the main thing holding black people back, or is the main thing that has traditionally held black people back, historically held black people back, and their supporters, whether those are fellow black people or white liberal extremists, claiming that money or some form of reparation is necessary, whether that's a scholarship, some type of program, a grant, again, just writing a check. If those are the things that are going to make black people whole again, they're leaving out the important aspects of human capital and decision making that also will be necessary. Because as I said in the episode on human capital, episode 1869, just a couple weeks ago, I made it very clear that if you give tangible capital to someone who lacks human capital, they will blow the tangible capital. Why? Because they don't have the human capital and know what the hell to do with it. You give opportunity to an idiot, they're going to blow the opportunity. True or not true? You put a dumb person in a good situation, they're going to figure out a way to fuck it up. Now, I'm not saying that black people are idiots or dumb people. I hope not. They better not be. But at the same time, Booker T. Washington was saying over 100 years ago, we got to be prepared for the opportunities that we claim we want. And if all the focus is being put towards what someone else or something else, some entity needs to do for black people, then that means no emphasis is being put on how do we build and develop the human capital necessary to take advantage of the opportunities that we want. I don't see too much focus being put on it. I mean, people like myself talk about it, but there are a lot of people who don't really talk about it enough. And even when they do, they soften the message so much that people don't hear it. It gets mentioned, but it gets softened to the point that you're not really putting it in people's faces in a way that they need to hear it. And I told you in the episode, I gotta tell you what episode that was. It was episode number 1251, where I talked about learning to speak multiple languages within a language. What that means is, when I talked about that, is that many times in life, you got to communicate with people on a level at which they can understand you. And I'm bringing up that episode again. It's episode 1251. I'm telling you that to tell you this, that when you're talking to people who have really simplistic ideas and people who are really on this, all right, the system has done this and they need to do this to make us whole for the things that they've done against us. If you share with them the concept of human capital, that human capital needs to be built, as I talked about in episode, 1869, where I talked about human capital, understand that they are only going to understand it if you put it in their faces the same way that they're putting whatever they said in your face. You got to be able to communicate on their level. So even though the language that I'm speaking is still English, I got to speak a different dialect of English when I'm talking to certain people than when I'm speaking to other people. For example, when I give a speech at a corporate event, I'm speaking a certain dialect of English. But when I'm talking to some kids standing on the corner, I got to speak a different dialect of English. Even though it's both English, I can't talk to the corner kids the way I talk to the corporate people. And I don't talk to the corporate people the same way I talk to the corner kids. And I'm saying all of that to say this: when people are softening their message, when they're saying, yes, we do need human capital, but then they put all the emphasis on what the system needs to do, people don't even notice the part about human capital got brought up. And that's why somebody like me, I come in and say, listen, are there some systemic things that have happened and maybe could happen? Yes and yes, but here's the emphasis. We need to build our own human capital. We need to focus on what we're doing over here. And I want to make sure that I'm being 100% clear when I'm saying that. And that's why I am going to continue to repeat this. When we don't have, as a black community, if we don't have knowledge, skill, wise decision-making on our side, I mean, as a group, as a whole, on a widespread level, a fool and their money will soon part. Again, you could write a reparations check for as much money as you want. That money won't stay in the community. It doesn't stay in the community now, whatever amount we got. In the black community, our dollars leave the community much faster than they do in other communities via a website called the FAMUN. This is written at Florida A&M University, which is a historically black university, also known as the HBCU. They say it themselves. Studies say that the average lifespan of the dollar in an Asian community, it means when an Asian person has a dollar, that dollar moves about within the community, meaning the Asian person spends money at an Asian business, and then that Asian person takes that dollar and spends it somewhere else, and it stays in the Asian community for 28 days, meaning Asians just supporting other Asian businesses. 28 days. Keep that number in mind. That's for Asians. In the Jewish community, a dollar stays in the community for 19 days, meaning Jewish people buying from and selling to other Jews. In the white community, 17 days, white people buying and selling from each other. Interesting, right? Being that there are more white people than any of these other communities, but 17 days for white communities, only third in the race. In the black community, how long do you think the dollar stays around? Asian community, 28 days. Jewish community, 19 days. White community, 17 days. And the black community, how long? Now, mind you, this information is shared by a newspaper at a historically black college and university. I believe this is a school, I believe FAMU is where Mr. Kendi, the author of the anti-racism book, went to school. I think that's the school he went to. I might be wrong on that. But anyway, the answer is 6 hours. Not 6 days, 6 hours is how long a dollar stays within the black community. We immediately take that dollar and go put it in a different community. Now, why is this? Well, there are several reasons that is not specifically the topic of today's episode. One of them is that there may not be that many black businesses for us to support. There might not be as many businesses around for me to give my dollar to. So if I need something, then I got to give it to a different community because nobody else has what I need that's in the black community. It could also be that we're not supporting each other. Could be we're looking at each other like, oh, I'm not going to support that black person. Their business might not be that good. The white business might be better. Let me give my dollar to them because they might just have a better product than what the black person has. Now, this is all getting into reading people's minds, which I am humanly incapable of doing, but I'm just throwing out some reasons for why the dollar doesn't stay in the black community as long as it stays in other communities. The point that I'm making, though, is we as black people, we don't keep our own money in our own community. So if you give us more of it, what's going to happen to it? Based on this study, again, by HBCU, is going to leave our community anyway. So you put $1 million in a black community, it's going to leave the black community in 6 hours. It says it right here. It's not the white folks who need to change. It's not the system that needs to change. We need more of our own people building things of value. We need more human capital in our own community so that we can keep the dollars in our community. We might not give the dollar to our own community because there's nowhere to spend it. We need more businesses offering some actual substance, more people offering substance that we can actually spend on. Now, funny enough, here's the funny part about this. When did the black dollar stay in the black community the longest? What period of time was the black dollar staying in the black community the longest? Way back before I was born, back before blacks even had civil rights. Back before we even had the right to vote. The black dollar stayed in the community longer then than it does now. Now, you can draw your own conclusions as to why that is, but that's the truth. We were denied access. I'll give you some information, and you can use this as your conclusion if you wish, but I'll give you the information. Black people were denied access to much of the white world. You had even water fountains. Black people had this one, and white people had this water fountain. They couldn't even drink from the same water fountain. And because of this separation, the segregation between blacks and whites, black people were forced, keyword forced, to be, here's another keyword, self-sufficient. They didn't have access to the white world. Much of the white world didn't have access. So we had to figure out how to do it on our own. We had to figure out how to support ourselves and support each other because we didn't really have any option to go away outside the community even if we wanted to. And guess what? When we were forced to figure it out on our own without any help from the outside world, from the others, we figured it out. And the communities thrived and we had more value within the community and staying in the community when we didn't have a choice but to stay in the community. And some say, well, then Dre, yeah, you're right about that, but there were many examples, and you can pull plenty of examples for anything, by the way. Any of you who wants to use an example as proof. Examples are not proof. Examples are just examples. But people will throw out an example and say, well, yeah, whites attacked some black thriving communities and destroyed them. And listen, that's true. And there are examples, but it's not the whole truth of the situation. First of all, let's be clear about something. Yes, you can burn down a building. Yes, you can shoot and kill a man, and you can beat people up, you can segregate people, you can be racist against people and all those things. But as long as that person's alive, outside of killing them, human capital cannot be destroyed. Tangible capital can be destroyed. You can steal money from a person. You can evict someone from a building. You can lose a business, but human capital cannot be destroyed. Someone starts a business and that business fails. The knowledge that they created and learned, rather, knowledge that they acquired in building and running that business, even a failing business, the human capital that they gain will make them that much better for the next opportunity. That's human capital. You can't destroy human capital. And secondly, the key to this self-sufficiency within the Black community at the time, before we even had civil rights, before integration, was the mentality of doing for self, which I detailed in episode number 1621. So this mentality of doing for self, of Black self-sufficiency and self-accountability within the community, that evaporated when the United States government stepped in. The United States government at that time was a whole lot of white people, offered to help, quote unquote, Black people. And what it ended up doing, and maybe that was their intention, who knows? Again, I can't read people's minds, but the result was Black people became more dependent on the government through programs like welfare and things like, even to this day, affirmative action, and became less self-sufficient. And then there was less Black accountability within the community. And there are myriad reasons for that. We're not going to get into all of them here today. I could write a whole book on the subject, but that's how all this began. Let's move on to point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is Black self-accountability. Second point is unequal outcomes do not equal racism. Now, I think many of you may already understand this. There are some of you who do not agree with this. And there are people who have written entire books, as I talked about in episodes 1788 through 91, that if the outcomes are not equal, then that means that something is racist and there's some racism. You can smell racism if the outcomes are not equal, which doesn't stand up logically. It doesn't make any sense. But as I explained to you a couple days ago, the anti-racism and these people yelling systemic racism, this is not about logic and facts to them, because if it was, then we could all agree, because logic and facts aren't that wide open to interpretation. This is a religion for them. This is more about belief than it is about logic. But if the only reason for the difference between, let's say, Blacks and whites, let's just use them as an example, the only difference is money, if the only reason for the difference is money, then listen, racism should be over with all this money that's being thrown around. I mean, right? But it's not going to be. Now, why won't it be? Because the choices made, and when I say racism, I'm saying that kind of tongue-in-cheek. Racism is a way of thinking, but these people are saying, well, it's racism because people don't have the same things. Okay, so if that's racism, then racism should be gone as soon as Canada gives $200 million and Michael Jordan gives another 100 and Target does this and whatever other corporations do these things to give money to Black people, then that racism should be over. But it's not going to be over. Why is that? Because the choices made by and the human capital available to those who receive it will keep things unequal. If Black people don't have the same levels of human capital available that white people do, and or we are not using them the same way that whites and Jews and Asians are using their human capital, then of course we're not going to get the same outcomes. And we shouldn't get the same outcomes. And here's the thing. 2 Black people living next door to each other don't use their human capital the same way. They don't use their money the same way. They don't have the same amounts of human capital. They don't make the same decisions. Of course, they're not going to get the same outcomes. So this whole premise that unequal outcomes must mean that racism is somewhere around the corner does not stand. It doesn't make any logical sense. But people continue to push this, again, for reasons that are much more emotional than they are logical. So don't try to make a logical argument to an emotional person. It's a waste of time. It's like you're speaking Chinese to a person that doesn't speak Chinese. So people talk about systemic racism, but they never assess, when talking about it, the choices that people make, the strategies that they're using, and the decisions that they're making, the people who end up losing the race, the people who are behind in this race in life. Okay, what decisions are they making? What choices have they made? What strategies are they employing? And how can we help them with those things, building their human capital, i.e. teaching a man to fish instead of asking ourselves, oh, what fish can we give them to help them out? You give a fish to a person that doesn't know how to fish, tomorrow they're going to be right back at your doorstep asking you for another fish. I'll tell you a quick story. For a short period of time, a couple months, several years ago, this is over 10 years ago, I was staying in Tampa Bay, Florida. Tampa Bay. This is Wesley Chapel, Florida was the name of the town. And I was in Wesley Chapel not too long ago, and I drove through it, and it's been super duper much more developed now than it was back then. But I remember being there, and I remember I was talking to this guy. He had a house that was in like a development, and there was a lake behind his house. Not right behind it, but he had a yard with a fence, and then you could walk, like 20 yards, and there's a lake there. And inside the lake, there were alligators or crocodiles. I don't know the difference between the two. One of them is bigger than the other. I think crocodile is bigger than an alligator, but I think they were a little bit smaller. But anyway, I remember standing near the lake, and I could see the alligators in the water, and you know how if you ever watch National Geographic, or you look these up on YouTube, the alligators would be sitting there, you could just see their eyes peeking above the water, but other than that, you wouldn't even know they were there. So this is how they catch their prey. But anyway, he was telling me this story of how one of his neighbors, who also, they had the lake behind them, and everybody knew there were gators in the lake. One day he left some food out to feed one of the gators. And he fed the gator maybe 2 or 3 days in a row. He fed the gator. And then one day he came to his balcony door to open the sliding door that will lead to outside. He had not fed the gator, but the gator was standing at his back door waiting for him to feed him, because the gator was expecting to get fed again. These animals ain't dumb, all right? They know where to get the food. They're not gonna pass up a free meal. And I'm telling you, I'm giving you that anecdote to tell you this is the same thing with people who lack human capital. If you give them a fish, they're gonna keep showing up and asking for more fish. And hey, maybe that's what's happened here. That there is definitely an argument that a lot of what is going on even to this very day, with a lot of black people saying what the government needs to do and what the system needs to do for them, is asking to be given another fish, instead of asking themselves, hey, why don't y'all just teach me to fish so we could talk one time and we don't ever have to have this conversation again. But that will require a high level of self-accountability. And honestly, I don't think a lot of people want that conversation, because, well, who wants to go do the work and learn how to fish when you could just get a fish for free? I don't know too many people who fit that description. What do you think? Again, could those have something to do with these outcomes? Could it have some effect? And again, I've done master classes on these things about teaching people to fish, about strategy, about decision making, and about choices that people make. I did an episode on decision making. That was I talked about how to be a professional decision maker in episode number 1574, episode 1308, how to make smarter decisions, episode 1270, how to cure yourself of indecision, episode 920, strengthening your decision making muscle, episode 837, doubt and decision do not mix, episode 782, greatness is a decision, episode 699, the life-changing power of decision, episode 569, failure is a decision, episode 296, how to start making your own decisions, episode 229, a real decision does not have a plan B. Shall I continue? Again, everything that I'm saying here, I'm on the record with, just to be clear, any of you who is new. Point number 3, today's topic, once again, is about black self-accountability. Money does not change the system. The big thing now, again, people are talking reparations. I heard Bob Johnson, who I believe might be the richest black man alive, or maybe he was the first black billionaire. Some distinction he has about the amount of capital he has acquired and also being black. And I just saw an article just yesterday from when I'm recording this. I didn't read it yet, but I saved the article, that he's saying that black people do deserve reparations, and he has his arguments and his points for it. Money does not change the system. If you believe, you listener, if you believe that systemic racism is a big problem for black people in America, and because you believe that, let's just say you believe that, and comma, someone hands you a stack of money because of the systemic racism against blacks, or at least they hand a black person a stack of money. If you're white, you don't get nothing. All right, but if you're black, you get all the money, okay? So somebody hands you a stack of money to atone for the systemic racism of America. Well, what about the system? All right, do you still believe that the system is wrong? Do you still believe that the system needs to be overhauled? Is it over when somebody hands you the money? How much money? If there's a black person listening to me right now, send me a text and let me know. How much money does the government need to give you for you to forgive them for their systemic racism? How much will shut you up? Now, how much hush money does the government need to give you for you to never mention systemic racism ever again? How much money they got to give you? Is there a price at which they can shut you up and end this conversation? The government said, look, we will give you money to atone for systemic racism. We will give you money to atone for racism. We will, not racism, for slavery. We will pay you reparations. But here's the deal. If we give you this money and we give it to everybody, you can never mention any of this stuff ever again. We just got to we're going to act like this. Not act like it didn't happen. It did happen, but we're never going to bring it up. You're never going to bring this up and use it against us ever again. How much? Name a number and we're going to negotiate on that number. What's the number for you, black folks? Send me a text, 305-384-6894. What is the number that we can give you? This is the government talking, that you will never mention this stuff again you'll never use this again as a crutch. You'll never use it against us, and you'll never use it against yourself ever again. How much? There are people out there in companies who say they are fighting systemic racism by giving away money. All right, that makes no sense. It doesn't make sense to give money to fight systemic racism. I mean, I thought the problem was the system. So how's the problem the system? Systemic racism, right? That's the system. But at the same time, you're saying the system needs to write you a check. But you're against the system, but you want the system to pay you. Now, which one is it? I think there you might have to pick one. What is your program to change the system or to create a new system? Now, see, when the conversation turns to reparations, nobody wants to destroy the system anymore. They don't want to destroy the system when they think the system's going to write them a check. And again, as I said, I'm making this point and then arguing against the point with the understanding that all of this stuff that I hear a lot of woke mofos talking about is that it is not a logical argument for them, and they're not trying to be logical. It's an emotional argument. Again, just like believing in a religion. Racism is a religion for some of these people. But so many people believe in systemic racism, but they want a company or a government to give them something. So somebody help me make sense of this. If it's possible, help me make sense of this. Again, send me a text and you can let me know. The number is down below in the show notes as well. Point number 4, today's topic, once again, is about Black self-accountability. The system that actually needs to be focused on, if anyone would ask me, Dre, well, what system do you think needs to be changed? How do we change the system? Yes, there is a system that needs to be changed, and the system is the one of Black people within ourselves. Is we need to look at ourselves. Not what the government is doing, has done, or will do, or needs to do. Not what white people is, has, will, or needs to do. Is what we need to do. For ourselves, with ourselves, to ourselves. What values are we teaching each other? Do we have 2 parents in the homes? What are we accepting and tolerating in our own communities? Are we defending people who are doing things to tear down our own communities just because that person happened to get into a negative interaction with a white cop and then they get beat up by the cop, arrested by the cop, shot and killed by the cop? Are we defending the actions that they were taking before the cop interaction as if what they were doing was not tearing the community down before the police interaction? So now we're going to make a hero out of that person just because a white cop did something to them. Well, what about everything they did in their lives up to that point? Why is nobody calling that out? Why is nobody talking about that? And if they do, why are they softening it so much that we don't even hear it? What are we accepting and tolerating in our own communities? And look around at the other communities where the money stays around longer, where they're achieving more academically, where they have 2 parents in the home much more often than we do. Are they tolerating the same things that we're tolerating? And look at the people from outside of our communities. Why are they condoning and promoting and telling us to do more of things that bring our community down, whereas no one's telling them to do it in their communities? Why are we allowing it in our communities? Why are things like, I listen to things like gangster rap music. I listen to a lot of it. I listen to it all damn day for the most part. And I know the words and I can recite entire albums word for word without even hearing the music. But at the same time, I can separate listening to the music as entertainment and going out and actually living it out. And one of the reasons that I can do that, because I had 2 parents at home and I had what we call home training, and I know how to separate entertainment from what I should actually partake in as an adult who knows right from wrong. But in our community, there are a lot of people who don't know the difference, obviously, by their actions. Now, I'm not saying we need to abolish rap music. No, I hope not. I like listening to it. At the same time, why are we condoning some actions by people who seem to be living out what they listen to in a rap song? I don't know what they're thinking, but it seems like they're living out what they heard on some rap album. And then they do something dumb, and then we're defending them as if they weren't doing things to bring our community down or at least make us look bad. Why are we not calling them out and saying, yo, stupid, what are you doing? You're making us look bad. You're bringing our community down. They don't do that in the Jewish community. They don't do it in the white community. They don't do it in the Asian community. Why are we tolerating and accepting it in our own community? And if you don't tolerate and accept it, if you agree with what I just said, why are you softening it when you talk about it? Well, I know why you are, but you tell me why you are. And maybe I'll do a whole episode just on that. What are we accepting and tolerating? This is the question I really want someone to answer for me. I want you to text me and tell me, Why do we as black people accept and tolerate what we accept and tolerate in our communities, but you don't see any other community doing this? I mean, everybody knows George Floyd's death was what set this whole thing off last year. George Floyd has had statues built for him since just this year. I've seen a couple statues got revealed, not revealed, but announced and revealed, I guess, for George Floyd. Now, George Floyd's death did set off a whole chain of events and I guess a racial awakening, I guess if we're going to call it that, a reckoning for America. Some people are calling it that, whatever you want to call it. Yes, it did start something. It got a lot of people talking. It definitely did. George Floyd's death got more people talking than Colin Kaepernick's kneeling. We can attest to that. Now, George Floyd didn't die on purpose. I mean, he didn't set out and say, I'm going to get myself killed by some cops today when he went and died. When it comes to building a statue, do I think George Floyd should have a statue? Hell no. He should not have a statue. Because the statue gets built for someone who voluntarily, on their own volition, was doing something to help people, at least based on whatever was going on at those times. Just like there are statues for people who are Confederate war generals. And even though the Confederacy lost the war, and a lot of what the Confederacy's point was, they wanted to maintain slavery at the time, in the world at that time, that was a thing, and it was a normal thing. And if you were out trying to be an abolitionist living in a Confederate state back at that time, you were putting your life, your reputation, and your career on the line. Now, there are people who are listening to me today who said they would be an abolitionist back in the day. No, you wouldn't. You'd have got killed. You'd have got lynched. Even if you were white, they would have killed you for trying to stop slavery. So, yes, it sounds good to talk about it now. Tell me one thing you're doing right now to put your life on the line. Tell me one thing you believe in now that goes against the grain so hard that your life is on the line literally every day. You can't name one. So yes, it sounds good to be that bold now from the safety of today, but you wouldn't have did it then because you ain't doing it now. Anyway, the point that I'm making about the George Floyd statues, plural, there are more than one, there probably will be more in the future, is he wasn't voluntarily doing anything to uplift the community. If anything, some of the things that we know about him, I don't know a ton about everything about George Floyd, but he had been in and out of the system. He had committed some violent crimes. All right, he's not a person we need to build a statue to. What are you going to tell your kids 20 years from now? They see a George Floyd statue. Who's he? What did he do? Oh, well, he got killed by a white cop. I mean, that's what he did, right? That's what got him a statue. He got killed by a white cop. I would be kind of confused if my parents told me, oh, he got killed by a white cop. I might go, well, is that an accomplishment? Why did they build a statue for him? I mean, somebody help me out. If somebody thinks there should be a statue for George Floyd, text me, tell me why. Why should there be a statue for a guy who, again, he didn't die on purpose. He didn't do that. That wasn't his choice to get killed. It ain't like he signed up for the army knowing that he was putting his life on the line. Even that would be something different. But he was just out, apparently, on drugs, allegedly used a counterfeit $20 bill, allegedly. And then he resisted arrest. He ended up getting killed because he resisted arrest. He would have just went to jail had he not resisted the arrest. We building a statue for that? Again, what other communities doing this? If we're going to make it about comparisons, and listen, Ibram Kendi wrote the book. I didn't write the book, everybody. He wrote the book. If we're comparing our outcomes to other communities' outcomes, why are we building statues to people like George Floyd? Is the Asian community going to build a statue to somebody with that profile? Is the white community doing it? Are Jewish people doing it? Are Latin people doing it? Why are we the only ones building statues to that person? Why are we the only ones doing it? But then we want to compare our outcomes to them, but we got to compare our actions to them. We got to compare what we tolerate and what we accept to what they're doing. Why are we not doing that? See, we only want to compare when it comes to what we need to get. But what are we comparing? Why are we not comparing when it comes to what we need to give and what we need to do different and how we need to look at ourselves? Where's the comparison then? What do we do with people who are not uplifting the community, but are actually bringing the community down? Listen, George Floyd shouldn't have died the way that he did. And the guy who did it went to court, and the other officers are going to go to court too. That guy got convicted. He got, I believe it was 22 and a half years in prison. So listen, the justice system, quote unquote, worked in this particular case for George Floyd. So yes, he deserved to go to court and deserved to go to prison for that because he was convicted by a jury of his peers. That's the way the system works in America. And we could just leave it at that. But to build a statue for him, there's going to be George Floyd libraries, George Floyd schools. These things are going to happen, guaranteed. People are going to write books about George Floyd's life. That's going to happen too. All these things are going to happen. But what do we do? What are we doing with people who are, and when they have a choice as to what they're doing, they're not bringing the community up, but we're making heroes out of these folks. Again, you want to compare black people to what white people got, and Latin people got, and Asian people got, and Jewish people got? Okay, let's compare our actions to them as well. Let's compare what we tolerate and what we celebrate to them as well. See, the race hustlers, who I talked about in episode number 1824, the race hustler, they make all of their messages about externalities. Everything a race hustler talks about is an externality. They never talk about what's going on internally. It's all about what white people have done or what white people have compared to black people, the government, and all these other, anything outside of ourselves, right? But you never hear a race hustler talk about what black people need to do for themselves. You never hear Al Sharpton talk about that. Jesse Jackson doesn't talk about it. Ibram Kendi doesn't talk about it. Who are the other ones? You name them. There's so many of them I can't even remember. All right, they never talk about what the black community needs to do for itself. We protest when a white cop kills a black person, but when a black person kills a black person, we don't know any of those names. I mean, the movement's called Black Lives Matter. So a life is a life, right? A black person dying is a tragedy no matter who did it. So why do we only know George Floyd's name? Because a white person did it. Again, a black person kills another black person. That means not only did a black person lose their life, Black Lives Matter, we don't hear y'all on that, but also a black person is committing murder. All right, that's not helping us. That person might have had some talent and skill that could be great human capital, but now they're going to be in prison. Or somebody's going to kill them because of retaliation for the first murder. So it's hurting our human capital. It's making our community look bad. It's making our communities less safe. They killed somebody. They might get killed. They may end up in prison, raising the rate of people who are imprisoned in America. Another thing the race hustlers like to talk about a lot. But nobody makes any stink about a black person killing a black person. But a white person does it. Everybody got to come out the house and stop everything and kneel about it. Again, what are we tolerating? What are we accepting? And let me tell you what's the crazy part of all of this. There are people who are mad at me right now for even saying what I just said for the last 5 minutes. For talking about how black people need to hold themselves accountable. People are mad at me for not making it more about the white people and the government. Every other culture in America makes heroes out of the winners, out of people who have created something, made things better, uplifted the community, done something on their own volition to make things better for the community. Those are the people that get celebrated by white people, Jews, Latins, Asians. What do? We make heroes out of a guy who got killed by the cops while he was resisting arrest after allegedly using a counterfeit bill and being high on drugs in the middle of the day. And people are mad at me for saying that. We send rappers to go speak to presidential candidates and then expect to be taken seriously when that candidate becomes the elect and doesn't do what we thought they were going to do, quote, for us, close quote. And then we expect to be taken seriously. What other community does this? I don't see any Latin salsa dancers talking to presidential candidates and people cheering that that person, quote unquote, made it to be interviewing a presidential candidate. But we want to be taken seriously. If you're a white person who's listening to this right now, look at your community. If you're Asian, if you're Jewish, am I wrong? I mean, I'm not white, Asian, or Jewish, so maybe I'm just looking at things from the outside looking in. Correct me if I'm wrong. Enlighten me if I just don't know something. All right, I don't want to be ignorant. Ignorant means not to know. So if I don't know, cure me of my ignorance. Any Asians, whites, or Jewish people listening to this, and let me know if I got it wrong. And you can also let me know if I got it right. These are internal issues that I'm talking about. But see, looking inside is hard work. I talked about in episode number 1153. The concept is leadership and is the mirror and the window. See, leaders look in the mirror and they say to themselves, what do I need to do? What can I do to make myself better? Because that's the only thing I can control. People who are not leaders, they look out the window. They look at externalities. All right, what is everybody else doing to me? What does everybody else have compared to what I got? And how can I, make us think about how I can get it or how I deserve it? All right. In our community right now, we don't have a lot of leaders. We need leaders in our community, and we're very short on them. But again, if you're not black, Tell me. Do I have this right? Do you see the same thing that I'm saying? You don't have to say it publicly. I won't tell anybody what you said. We just keep it private. I get it. Not everybody wants to stand up and say what I'm saying right now. That's why I got the mic. When all the problems are on the outside, in your mind, what are you responsible for? If every problem in your life is an externality, what are you responsible for? The answer is you're responsible for nothing. You're just responsible for making sure everybody knows about it, starting a conversation, so to speak, so that everybody knows about it, and then everybody can do something for you. And that's precisely why nothing is changing in our community. Despite all the noise, what has actually changed? You know, they say we're with you, the NBA, the NFL, the government, everybody. We're all about supporting people who are helping us in the movement for change, right? Isn't that what everybody's saying? It's all about change. Tell me what's changed. Colin Kaepernick took a knee in 2016. It's 2021. What's changed? It's been 5 years. What's changed? This gap is intentional. I want to give you some space to think. Let's recap today's class, which is Black self-accountability. Point number 1, Booker T. Washington said, let's end racism, of course, but we also must be prepared for the opportunity that comes with the end of racism. When black people are throwing out systemic racism and they're saying they need some type of money to atone for the bad things that America has done with them, nobody's talking about the human capital necessary to make the most of that money. FAMU's newspaper said, the dollar stays 28 days in the Asian community, 19 days in the Jewish community, 17 days in the white community, 6 hours. Yes, 6 hours, 3,600, is that right? 360 rather, minutes in the black community. It's not the white folks who need to change. It's not the government that needs to change. We need more businesses. We need more people of substance. We need more people who are willing to talk about the accountability that we need, because human capital can't be destroyed. A building can be burned down. Human capital cannot. And the key to this sufficiency is the doing for self. The sufficiency that black people had even when there were no civil rights because they didn't have a choice. And I talked about that in episode 1621. Point number 2, unequal outcomes does not equal racism. If the only reason for the difference between races is money, then racism should be over with all the money that's been donated over the last year. But it will not be over. Why? Because the choices and decisions made by people, even if you give them a whole lot of money, will still put them right back in the exact same position. When people talk about systemic racism, they never talk about the choices, strategies, and decisions made by those who are allegedly being systemically oppressed. Does that have some effect on their outcomes? I would think so. Point number 3, money does not change the system. If you believe in systemic racism, but then you want the system to hand you a stack of money, what happened to your problem with the system? Is it over just because they're handing you a check? And for a lot of race hustlers, the answer is yes. They won't say that, but the answer is yes. What is your program to change the system? What's your program to create a new system? I haven't heard a single one that makes any logical sense. From a company, a government, or a person, I haven't heard one. But everybody's talking about how systemic racism is so bad. So somebody help me make sense of that. And point number 4, the system to be focused on is the system on the inside. That's for every person listening to this show, no matter who you are or what you do. What values are being taught in your internal community? What are you accepting and tolerating? What do you do with people who are bringing the community down, and how much attention do you give to those who are bringing it up? And is there a balance, or what's the difference between the two? Are you giving more attention to those who are bringing it down or those who are bringing it up? Race hustlers make all their messages about externalities and talk very little about what needs to be done on the inside. Even when they do, they soften it so much that you don't even hear what they said. We protest when a white cop does something to a black person, but say nothing when a black person does something to a black person. And then people get mad when you bring up black on black crime. Every other culture makes heroes out of winners. We make heroes out of losers and victims. We send rappers to speak to presidential candidates and cheer for them because they quote unquote made it. And then we want to be taken seriously when we complain that the candidate who ends up winning doesn't do what we wanted them to do. Well, we sent a rapper to talk to them. What did you expect? What do you expect them to think of you when that's who you're sending to represent you? When all of our problems are on the outside, theoretically, what are you responsible for? Apparently nothing. And this is why there's no self-accountability. And this is one of the reasons why black people are in the position that they're in here in America, because we're not holding ourselves accountable. And there's not too many of us willing to even say these things out loud. But that's why I'm here. So send me a text. Tell me what you got from this masterclass. What are you going to think, do differently, if anything? My number, 305-384-6894. Work on your game. Dre all day.